Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast today is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SCF FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, and the HKU edX Professional Certificate in FinTech, with support from the university's Faculty of Law. I'm your host, Jeiz Robles. The overarching theme of today's episode is diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, as it's better known by its acronym. In our initial spotlight segment, we'll be chatting with Jeiz Robles, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Hong Kong-based Community Business, about what the work of DEI professionals actually entails. Following that, we'll be talking with DEI expert Ritu Bhasin for a North American perspective on the future of DEI, as it appears to be under attack in many corporate quarters in the U.S., especially now that the Trump administration is in power in Washington, and the blowback that entails. But first, Jeiz Robles is a veteran human resources and workplace diversity specialist. In her current role at Community Business, she oversees that group's DEI portfolio, providing strategic and sustainable direction to various programming, including its flagship network, the Diversity Inclusion in Asia Network, better known as by its acronym DIAN, as well as consulting and training services, LGBTQ+, disability, and employee well-being campaigns by leading various teams of DEI consultants, program heads, and thought leaders through Asia. Jeiz also collaborates with Community Business's corporate partners from various industries and multinational corporations, functioning as a strategic advisor towards their DEI strategy and aspirations. She also manages strategic partnerships to bring to life positive impact to various underrepresented and underprivileged communities in Asia. She has a storied CV, incredible past of achievement. I won't belabor that point. But without further ado, Jeiz Robles, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, AJ, for having me. Really excited for today's session.
You started off in HR, and I can sort of see the natural, with the progression of time, the natural evolution of the DEI. For you personally, what drew you to DEI?
Yeah, no, it was actually more than a decade ago when my advocacy started. At a point of my life where my then partner, now wife, and I were trying to start our family because we've been together for around 10 years by that time. We're going on 20 years right now. But being in the Philippines where our partnership is not legally recognized, that meant so many different things. How do we even do it? What do we think about our taxes, our insurance, being dependent of each other? There are so many things that we had to think about. But we've reached a point where we realized that we were at the time both in a company, a tech company that actually values inclusion, have an employee resource group. So employee resource groups are volunteer groups that work towards a certain advocacy. That said, because of what we're thinking from a personal standpoint, we realized that maybe we can do something within the company, at least for now. And so that's where we started looking at equal benefits for LGBTQ plus partners, deploying programs, leaves, and different things alongside HR and our other employee network groups. So that was the start for me. And then I realized these things should be something that's not just available to one company, it should be available to all companies. And so I started to be active in intercompany organizations and started helping other companies do the same. So I've been doing that for a while as a volunteer. And I then started to volunteer for other employee network groups like disability and women's groups. Until I think the company realized that I've been doing so much volunteer work. Okay, let's start integrating Jeiz into the diversity and inclusion team. And so my last role when I was in corporate was actually a marketplace diversity leader for Asia Pacific that allowed me to work on inclusion within the company as well as with other organizations that we support, like our clients, our stakeholders, our vendors, and our community partners and that was where I got to know of community business that brings me to where I am now today.
Have you found Thailand, Bangkok, where you're currently based, to be more accepting and more welcoming?
Yeah, around 3 years ago, we did move to Thailand because of a job that my spouse got. But it's quite interesting because the progress recently, especially with Thailand, deploying marriage equality, was a pleasant surprise for me. Because when we moved here, I was thinking of it as just like a stopover, if I may say, because I was really wanting to move to a country that had marriage equality in place. So from a legislation standpoint, I guess yes, it's progressive. But if we consider the cultural and the traditional contexts between the Philippines and Thailand, they have their own like sources and cultural contexts, and so would also be different in terms of how people actually approach inclusion. So I won't say it's not. It's essentially better, but it is different.
Interesting. So, I mean, in your own words, I mean, you're head of the community business.
Mhm.
Well, what's a typical day like?
Yeah, yeah. Very good question. And love to give a little bit of like sense of how it looks like to be a D&I professional in the corporate space versus what I do now. Because it's a little different, but it gives insight into like what it actually entails. In the corporate space, my day looked like a lot like working from our global and regional D&I strategy, finding ways to deploy and create market or country specific programs that aim to achieve similar outcomes, a workplace where everyone is included and belongs. So that would mean working with employee networks, inclusion councils, business leaders, and HR leaders on a day to day perspective in the respective countries to deploy strategies and programs on allyship or creating inclusive leaders, ensuring belonging and well-being among others. So that's how it looked like in corporate. In my current space, though, because I'm now working, I transitioned into a nonprofit charity space. It's quite different because now, not only am I focused on one company to forward responsible business practices, I'm now focused on, if I may say so, everyone, because that's like the vision of who you want to reach. So that means co-creating programs for our corporate partners, co-creating enablement and training content, speaking with community partners to find ways on how we can support each other as well as bring in our corporate members in for that impact. So quite interesting being in a bigger space for impact.
You know, when Trump first came into office, DEI was under assault. A number of law firms were being sued. They were shutting down their DEI programs. A number of corporations, Walmart, Target, they were deciding to scale back their DEI programs. But then they realized nothing exists in a vacuum. Everything applies. That when they started scaling back their DEI programs, Target paid a heavy price because you saw a drop in Black and Hispanic people shopping there, and they felt it in terms of their bottom line. And so now they're backpedaling. But that's the U.S. Yet in Asia, it seems as though certainly in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and to some extent in India and places like the Middle East that I'm familiar with, like the UAE, and Qatar, there is a genuine concern and commitment to to DEI. I can't speak so much for mainland China, but why is that? Why do you think that despite what's going on in the West, um, people seem to take it more seriously here?
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with the perspective. At the beginning of the year, everything was uncertain, but I'm happy to see us progress to the middle of this year where companies are starting to see that, okay, they can still keep doing things, and they can still create impactful work. I think it's really because the work that we see, the more that we see these attacks, the more we are also seeing how relevant the progress has been in terms of being in Asia. If we stop looking at it from a globally driven Western perspective, we will find that there are specific drivers in this region that make it very relevant. One thing is regulatory requirements. In the different markets, there are requirements around board diversity, having workplace diversity policies, especially for companies that are part of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which is really good recent progress. There are also quotas on disability employment and recommendations in countries like China, Thailand, South Korea, and even the Philippines. So making sure that companies still comply to these requirements actually amplify this need. Another angle to this is regulatory limitations. With the lack of laws in most countries that recognize, for example, different types of families, neurodiversity, and invisible disabilities, it's becoming more evident that non-government as well as private organizations have to step up so that these types of families and individuals can be recognized and included. In countries where just being part of a certain community is illegal, it has become a moral imperative for the society to again step up and be a safe space for these individuals who will be criminalized just because they are being themselves. The last part of it, I think, is cultural nuances. The concept of collectivism in Asia versus individualism in other parts of the world affects our daily lives. An individual's well being is hugely dependent on the quality of their relationship with their families and their communities. That includes the workplace. What's important to one is not more important than what's important to many, which is very different in other regions. And so, maintaining harmony is very important. Respect, harmony, and common prosperity are values that are important to us here. And so when we inclusion and belonging, these are fundamentals of these local values.
Sounds like what you're saying is that because Asian society in general uh, is more communitarian, more community oriented, more group oriented rather than individual oriented, that tends to lend itself to DEI quite nicely in that we want harmony, we want everyone to be accepted, a place for everyone and everyone in their place. That everyone has a stake in society, everyone has a place in this society, and we don't want anyone to feel left out. So whereas you can see very easily in an individualistic society how people can very easily be left out.
Exactly, exactly.
It occurs to me though that paradoxically, that even though there's a strong lobby, there's a strong segment of the population in places like Hong Kong and Singapore, educated professional people, forward-looking people who value DEI. We're talking about societies that are very homogenous. That more so in Hong Kong. Singapore is still a majority Chinese city, followed by the Malays and the South Indians. But Hong Kong is, these places are so homogenous. One wonders, aside from the educated classes, the professional classes, do people at street level, does the general population really appreciate the benefits of DEI? Or is it just to them a fad? It's a movement of the day. It's a fad. It's something that's here to, just as once upon a time we talked about ESG, a decade earlier we talked about CSR. It's the dish du jour of right now.
Um, I would really see and offer a different perspective. Hong Kong is a vibrant melting pot of diversity with migrants, languages, and traditions. Around 10% of Hong Kong's population are ethnic minorities, not to mention an estimate of around 10 to 15% coming from the LGBTQ plus community. But I get what you mean. The majority could be seen as homogeneous. However, within
Of
this,
course, not all Chinese people think the same, and we have to be sensitive to that.
And there's also a huge aging population and what we call a sandwich generation, or those who are caregivers for both their children and their parents. And so when we talk about diversity, it is there. And as you mentioned, like people on the streets and the day to day, is it really relevant? I would say it's more relevant than people are aware of, because in our daily interactions, in our communications, what we only want is to be heard and to be respected and to hear everybody else. So because of that diversity, it's now about how do you make sure everyone does feel included, feel like they belong, feel like they can voice out their ideas and their opinions. And in a world that's diverse, we wouldn't want inequality or exclusion, which is the opposite of DE and I here, right? And so active efforts towards addressing the needs of a really diverse population is really important. So yeah.
So, in the time we've got left, any closing thoughts, any prognostications, predictions on your part about the future of DEI? Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
I guess I leave with some practical things in terms of how do we actually embody inclusion in the way that we live. And sometimes it's like just the simple things. Using inclusive language goes a long way. When we can, for example, avoid using gendered language, that automatically includes more people than it does at the current moment. Another thing is the simple thing of like creating awareness within and towards listening to the stories of people who are different from us, because it doesn't only make us aware, it also helps us understand and have different perspectives that can help with our day-to-day lives. And so I guess in terms of predicting how it will go for at least for the rest of this year, I think it's only going to get better because, like I said, companies, individuals, and even the community space is finally seeing the light and finally seeing all the possibilities that can continue to happen so that we can continue the work, especially here in Asia. Because at the end of the day, it's really a matter of life and impact to individuals who belong to the different diverse communities. Once again, thank you so much, Ajay, for inviting me to this space.
It's a lot of food for thought. Jeiz Robles, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. And we're back. We're continuing our discussion on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, something that was intended to, if not fix some of the injustices of the past, at least ameliorate them, particularly in the realms of employment, education, government, and in institutions writ large, by providing opportunities for individuals and groups that had previously been overlooked. It seemed all the rage, at least until the re-election of Donald J. Trump to the US presidency last November. Over the past year, we've seen some American law firms end their DEI programs after a judicial challenge. And indeed, corporate giants in the US, such as Walmart and Target, have also scaled back similar such programs. So, what does the future hold for DEI? Perhaps our guest, Ritu Bhasin, can shed some light on the matter. Ritu is a globally renowned, award winning life coach and empowerment speaker, a best selling author, and a much sought after expert and consultant on matters pertaining to leadership, talent management, workplace culture, and most importantly, inclusion. In addition to being a contributor to CBC Radio in Canada, she's also the CEO and founder of her own firm, Boston Consulting, situated in the Greater Toronto area. Her mission is to help build diverse and inclusive workplaces and to empower professionals to be strategic in leveraging their strengths in their career development. And with that, I will hand over to her. Ritu, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here, Ajay. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you grew up, your professional path leading you to what you now do in the space of DEI.
It's a great place to start because it will give great context to some of my insights. And so I am the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents, uh, parents who moved from India to Canada, which is where I was born along with my siblings now in the early 70s. And we were all born and raised here. And so when I say here, I'm actually joining you today from my home in Toronto. And I have a quintessential story or upbringing as a child of new immigrants to a country that was very different from them and where they looked very different from the people all around them. I watched my parents struggle like many immigrants do at a front row seat to taking in the inequities they experienced. And then I had my own challenges, including going through years of racist bullying as a child. And also coming from Indian roots, we're North Indian in particular, we're Punjabi by culture and Sikh by faith. And so my faith is called Sikhism. And as you know, we as a community are trying to have people pronounce the language correctly. And so it's Sikh in Sikhism or Sikhi, not Sikh in Sikhism. My father wears a turban, the full deal. And back in India, while growing up in the 80s in particular, my community experienced great persecution, genocide. And so growing up in our household, we talked a lot about social justice. We talked a lot about human rights. My parents were both parts of members of unions. And so caring about what happens in the world, civil rights, human rights was very pronounced in my upbringing. And so from a young age, I knew I wanted to do social justice work. And now this takes me into the 90s. Growing up, I decided that the best way to pursue justice would be to become a lawyer, which is what I did. But like many young people in law school who think they're going to do social justice work, I ended up getting swept up into the corporate tide because all the cool kids were going to go and work in the skyscrapers. And frankly, as a first year associate, even as a summer associate, a summer student, I would be making more money during my time there than my parents did combined when I was growing up. And so I was very enchanted by big law and big business. And I ended up going to the skyscrapers and worked for a large international law firm. So I started my career first as a lawyer. And I knew instantly, though, I didn't enjoy the practice of law. At first, I was a corporate associate, and then I thought, no, no, it's corporate law. And then I became a litigation associate. And then I was like, no, no, it's litigation. Anywho, I ended up leaving the practice of law, but stayed in the legal profession. I became an HR executive on the legal side, so a director of legal talent at one of the big law firms, and did that for 7 years. So everything that would be involved in talent management in the legal profession on the lawyer side, like hiring, retention, advancement, performance evaluations, all that. And I completed an executive MBA because I knew I wanted to make a career transition. And now, over 15 years ago, I made the decision to start my own global consulting firm, which is what I've been doing now for a
Kudos,
decade.
kudos. I mean, having run my own firm, I know it's a tough slog, especially in the beginning.
Thank you. And it's interesting. And when I was listening to your introductory remarks, I actually had a moment of thinking, like, wow, what a journey it has been. Like, if you had told me 15 years ago when I hung my shingle as a leadership and DEI consulting firm that right now there's less interest in DEI, but Ritu, keep building, but that 15 years from now, there would be efforts to undo all of the hard work, I would have said, no, come on. But here we are. And so it has been a really fascinating ride. I will say with tremendous gratitude that I feel so blessed to have done the work that I have done. For example, I have worked extensively in Asia, in Southeast Asia in particular. Like I've presented several times in Hong Kong to various audiences. And it's such an honor, a blessing, a privilege to have had this ride, although it has not been easy. It has been quite the journey.
So clearly that interest in social justice was born to some degree of the injustices you saw directed at yourself and your parents, and even though Sikhs have a long history in Canada, going back to the 19th century, they are highly regarded members of the society, and there is a stereotype caricature of them being fine, splendid fellows who grow strawberries, and of course they've moved on to a great many other things in the century plus that they've been Canadian citizens. So was it that social justice angle that drew you to DEI, or was it more of an anticipation of this is a growth field of the future in much the same way that some envisaged CSR was going to take off or ESG was going to take off, and they positioned themselves accordingly ahead of something that they saw was going to be an upcoming trend?
That's a great question. I think at the time for me, and it has continued to be the case, is that I deeply hold the value of equity in as a principle, as a pillar, as a way of being. And I social justice flows, societal justice flows from the concept of equity, understanding that we don't all start from the same place, that the playing field isn't level. And it's not level because of historical experiences with inequities, inequality, and the current experiences. And in order for us to create a level playing field, we need to do things differently, do extra, do more, which isn't about helping incompetence flourish or favoritism. It's about recognizing that if we don't do things differently, that excellence can fall through the cracks. And so I have always been committed to this concept of equity, even though back then I may not have known that that's what the word was or the term was. And so it's what attracted me to want to study the law, because I knew that the law, or at the time, I held the belief that the law was a powerful tool or a vehicle, a social mechanism that could help yield equity. And that's what attracted me to want to become a lawyer. But then again, I found myself working in the corporate towers, practicing corporate law in various forms. That said, when I transitioned to becoming an HR leader, what I then found, because I applied an equity lens to everything I was doing and have continued to, is that I was noticing that there were patterns in the workplace around who gets ahead and who doesn't, and not based on skill alone, but on the basis of pre-held notions, biases, judgments around who will be excellent and who won't be. So for example, if you take two junior team members who start at the same time, who have similar educations, they could have very different personal backgrounds, but they start at the same time, same education level, and at the moment, similar skill sets and analytical ability. But one of the team members, person A, gets cultivated. So person A receives a lot of mentorship, a lot of sponsorship, a lot of advocacy, a lot of guidance, a lot of access to profile building experiences, a lot of access to high quality work, stretch assignments, high quality feedback, and more. And while person B does not, it is likely that person A will flourish and grow. In fact, knock me over with a feather if that doesn't happen. Person A will grow and flourish and thrive, while person B will lag behind. And the challenges in the workplace that once we start cultivating person A and we don't cultivate person B's growth, that person A will keep flourishing and therefore attracting better quality work and more profile and more mentorship and sponsorship. And there'll be a buzz around person A, and person B will lag behind. And it is very difficult for person B to catch up. So I noticed that these patterns around who gets to be person A and who ends up being person B. And that's ultimately what led me to want to focus my efforts on working with organizations globally on how do we build workplaces where everyone gets to flourish and thrive. Everyone gets to experience belonging. Everyone gets access to high quality work and stretch assignments and gets that cultivation that's needed to thrive and flourish. And so I guess the thing that I did that I don't think it wasn't strategic in the sense that I sat down and I said, okay, you know what, Ritu, I was going to practice social justice law. Now I'm doing corporate law, but now I'm going to do HR. And actually what I'm going to do is focus on DEI because I care about social justice. It happened more organically. I followed my interests. I followed my heart. I cultivated along the way for myself what gave me purpose and meaning. And here's an important insight. We know from extensive research, leadership research, that when a person feels purpose and meaning in what it is that they do for a living, they're more likely to thrive, they're more likely to produce, they're more likely to innovate, create, experience belonging, give more, all of that. And so I did that organically for myself. And then of course my mind caught up with what I was doing and I was like, oh, this is what I'm doing, but you know what? I love it. And frankly, the world needs it given how diverse and global the workplaces are becoming. So let me just keep growing it. And so again, it's been a really fascinating, wild ride.
It's incredible when what you do fills a need in the market, but also can certainly be characterized as a noble act that the world is sorely in need of. Beyond markets, beyond the pecuniary, getting to concepts such as justice, and your point is well taken, in that those that continue to be nurtured and mentored and prepped for success, that it should not surprise us that they tend to succeed. I mean, I remember my investment banking prof, one-time boss, Ken Johnson in Chicago, saying to me at IIT that, um, you know, his experience of getting into, the Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management was as hard of a school as it was to get into. That once you were in, they did everything in their power to see to it that you succeeded, and that I think that's what you're describing. That those environments where certain individuals, again, they're cultivated for success, they're marked for success. Those around them did everything in their power to see to it that they succeeded. Should it surprise us that they have a leg up, and those that are overlooked for whatever reason, what do we say about them? Do they fall by the wayside? Do they pull themselves up by their own bootstraps? I mean, we should, because I mean, there are examples of people that have every benefit thrown at them, and are still incredible screw ups as well. I mean, and you have no shortage of tales of those that overcome adversity and the lack of opportunity to create their own opportunities and their own success. But again, we have to be realistic, and it does seem as though that sometimes indifference can be one of the most cruelest forms of injustice. That can be one of the most cruelest forms of discrimination. That some people will just never have a chance because
Mm-hmm.
they just don't end up on the radar of the powers that be.
Yes, that's true. And this is the experience that I wish to interrupt through my work and my advocacy. The interrupting indifference, interrupting inequities, interrupting the biases and judgments that prevent us from accessing the lives we want to live. And this is why diversity, equity, inclusion work is so important.
But the opponents of DEI would say diversity doesn't really matter. Just get the best person for the role. Ultimately, what does it serve society other than the feel good factor? That is the cynical, snarky response, and it has taken hold in the corporate sector, in the business world. But again, these things don't happen in a vacuum. And I think as even Target found out, there was a huge backlash between amongst African Americans and Hispanics when they stopped shopping at Target, and it affected their bottom line. And they ended up having to backpedal, hire Jesse Jackson to, to do image management work. But by then it was too late because it was clear they were being disingenuous. So I don't think it's an issue for you and I because that we were preaching to the choir, though the argument can be made sometimes the choir needs to be preached to. But if we were to explain it to the average person on the street, what purpose does DEI serve?
It's interesting because when I hear from leaders this sentiment that diversity isn't important, although I will admit that it's a rare day that leaders vocalize it so directly, given how strongly the value is held across leaders on a whole. But when it does arise, and some of we can see some of it arising now because of some of the pullback. I would argue that there's a lot of noise around the pullback. My experience is that a lot of clients are continuing the work, even though they may not be as visible about it, vocal about it. But when it is expressed, like, why is diversity important? It's for me a bit surprising because there's just so much research that speaks to how important it is. And so for the layperson, like the person on the street who's like, why does this matter? I would say, first of all, that innovation and creativity is born out of differences and not out of sameness. And we are now in a global marketplace where innovation and creativity, doing things better, doing things differently, is so important because we're all trying to be better and create more and more for the world in the best way possible. And so we need people who think differently and process information differently and categorize data differently to be sitting at decision-making tables to help yield that creativity and innovation. And so diversity matters for creativity and innovation. It matters from a profitability perspective for leaders who care deeply about the bottom line. It matters from a profitability perspective for several reasons. First of all, the work pipeline is becoming the talent pipeline is becoming more diverse now than ever before. We have more people there's more cultural, ethnocultural, racial diversity across global workplaces than we've ever seen, in addition to religious diversity, in addition to gender diversity. And gender, by the way, as we know across the world, isn't even viewed as, in a lot of regions in the world, isn't viewed as binary anymore. Sexual orientation, mental health, neurodiversity, like I could go on and on and on. Age, like generational diversity. We have more our workplaces reflect more age-based, generational-based differences than ever before. And that is a lot. Like it is a lot to contend with, like how we're working across differences. And so in order to have engaged, actualized, empowered, high-performing, collaborative teams, we need our team members to feel valued and seen. They need to feel like they can be who they are. They can be authentic. They can experience belonging. And, I talk a lot about this in both my books that I've written. The first one is called The Authenticity Principle. The second one that came out more recently is called We've Got This, Unlocking the Beauty of Belonging. That it is only when we experience the freedom to be who we are, to experience belonging, that we actually feel like we can give our best to interactions, to team experiences, to our workplace, to our leaders. And so in order to unlock contributions and get the most from our team members, we want people to feel seen and valued. And belonging authenticity ties directly back to Do you feel included? Do you feel like you can be your whole cultural, intersectional self at work? So that's really important. But let's talk about it from the perspective of like clients or customer and market share. I think a lot about the experience I clocked with Canadian banks, which I think are no different than other banks around the world. I remember 15, 20 years ago, the banks rarely in Canada talked about inclusion principles. Their marketing advertisements were often two white people, like elderly couple on a yacht in like a crystal blue waters, yachting around, planning their retirement.
It's a
And
homogenous society. Obviously, you're not going to expect Toronto Dominion to change that quickly.
well, that was 15, 20 years ago. Now, we, like many nations around the world, have a declining birth rate and are hungry for talent. We have a labor shortage here. We're desperate for labor. And I'm saying this now, let alone what's to come in the years in the future. And so we have dramatically relied on immigration over the last several years to help us fill our labor needs. And wouldn't you know it, the banks, every single Canadian bank, I can walk down the street or when I'm taking public transportation or even at the airport, there are signs saying, "You're new to Canada, we're the bank for you," because they're realizing that their existing customer client base is now actually transitioning in terms of life, like actually dying, passing away, passing along their wealth, which includes passing along wealth to women. But also, if you want to maintain your market share, you're going to have to convert non-customers into customers or attract a new customer base. Who is that new customer base? New immigrants to Canada. And they're heavily competing to attract customers from a growing, diverse base of people. And so the way we do business, what we sell to people around the world, how we market our business efforts, all of that ties back to an inclusion lens. And by the way, I've only given you 3 reasons here. I could go on and on about why this matters. And frankly, businesses that understand this are thriving and flourishing. Businesses that do not are being left behind. And so I feel like it's leaders who get it, they get it, is what I'll say.
Not only just enriching to a business's bottom line, but I was recently offered a job, but it was pretty well recompensed. It was an editorial role at a Chinese bank. And this Chinese bank was a real Chinese bank. And it was pretty homogenous. And, I reflecting on my own life, and I found that those roles that I was the best suited me, where I learned the most, where I enjoyed my environment, the people I worked with, were indeed the most diverse environments.
Yeah.
There was an enrichment factor to those roles and those workplaces that transcended the pecuniary. It went beyond just the mere recompense, which is important. Uh, but I flat out said no, and indeed, I found out the person that this role had been on the market multiple times
Mhm.
over the course of the past 18 months. And I spoke to, had I accepted, I spoke to the person who would have been my predecessor, and he was a white guy, and he was leaving for precisely that reason. He did not want to be the only, not to say they treated him badly, but he did not want to be the only white guy in a on a floor that was almost entirely Chinese.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, it's a good example of belonging matters. We think that belonging is only important sometimes for women or people of color or people from the LGBTQ plus communities. But every single human on this planet craves belonging because of the way in which we're wired as human beings. We register social rejection in our bodies as physical pain. And so we are wired to crave acceptance, love, affirmation from others. Every single person wants to feel belonging. And I think that's such an important lens to see the world through, that all of us are struggling to belong or desiring to belong at a minimum. But for some of us, it's harder to have that experience because of systems of power and privilege.
Totally. I mean, I think back to your point about belonging. I mean, I do think it goes to a sense of roots, and again, feel a place to call your own, where you're comfortable, where you're safe, where you can be yourself, where you can exist, where you can individuate. Thomas Friedman even pointed out in his book Lectures on the Olive Tree that those olive trees, they represent roots, they represent um, ties to a particular society, and that's something we do want. We do want people, as many people as possible, to feel as though they have a stake in society. And the guest we had on earlier, I mean, we were talking about the backlash against DEI in the West with the U.S. But in Asia, people are far more sanguine about DEI, and I asked why, and she said, "Well, you got to look at it. I mean, this is a cliche, it's a generalization, but it still holds good to a great extent. That with Asian societies, it's a more communitarian uh, perspective. It's more community oriented culture. So you don't want anyone to be left out typically. Uh, yeah, there are people that get treated like outsiders, but you typically, generally speaking, you want everyone to feel at home. You want everyone to feel accepted. And if that's your underlying cultural ethos, you can see how it would lend more towards supporting DEI than say, a rugged dog eat dog individualistic culture. And that is the perspective I find many of the opponents of DEI are coming at it from. And which leads me to my next question is, why do you see such a backlash against DEI in particularly in the U.S.? And is the generational divide? Do younger people tend to be more for it, older ones less so? What are your thoughts?
So, it's a really, really good question. I think, I mean, if I were to take a step back and say, why is this happening? I think at the end of the day, for me, this feels like fear of giving up privilege, fear of having experiences, opportunities, the privilege taken away. It feels like scarcity to me. So for some of you joining us, listening in, you'll be familiar with this concept of a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset. So with a scarcity mindset, we worry or fear that what we have is going
The
to.
zero-sum game paradigm.
Can you tell me what you mean by that? Because I want to make sure that we're in alignment.
Well, essentially, it fits nicely with the scarcity or the poverty mindset, and that the view is the pie can't get any bigger. There's a limited amount of resources and opportunities, and me and mine are going to get ours before everyone else does. And it's a dog eat dog competition, a Hobbesian state of
Yeah.
war, all against
Yes.
all,
Yeah.
rather than a collaborative process where we all benefit. I'm sure you've heard of the
Yes. I'm a
description
familiar.
of
Yes.
heaven and hell versus of two banquets rooms with both the same people with long forks uh, that can reach the food, but the forks are so long that they can't feed themselves. But in the other room, it's collaborative and people are feeding each other, thereby
Right.
raising overall prosperity.
Right. Exactly. So this idea that scarcity, abundance mindset, viewing the world through the lens of there's limited resources. I got to protect for me and mine, and a lot of fear around that, versus an abundance mindset, which is about there's more than enough in this world for all of us. And in fact, when you are enriched, I'm enriched too, because you're enriched, and understanding that we're all interconnected. And I think that what we're seeing as it relates to the attacks on DEI, for me, tie back to the scarcity mindset. It's fear of giving up generations, centuries of historic privilege and current day privilege. And I understand why that happens. I understand why this scarcity fear experience is happening if you come from that mindset. And a lot of this, by the way, is tied to capitalism. Like I think that increasingly here in Canada, the US, since we consume a lot of American media, and I also do extensive work in the US, we're hearing more and more criticisms around the adverse effects of capitalism. Like, yes, there are a lot of great things that are born out of capitalism, but this moment, this example of what we're seeing around the world shows you some of the harmful ways in which capitalism hurts us.
It takes an incredibly enlightened person to wholeheartedly accept that Buddhist perspective of we're all connected. Everything in the universe is connected to everything else and everyone. And, very hard for people to have that kind of an open mind and an open heart when they're feeling imperiled and put upon themselves, which causes me to ask. I mean,
But can I say something, Ajay?
sure.
I try, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. Everyone, I'm not perfect. I'm a flawed human being. I'm fallible like everyone else. I struggle. I'm constantly overwhelmed. I don't know if I'm coming or going. I have all kinds of strife. Let me just say that to begin with. I try my best to live with the spirit of abundance, and I'm doing my best to heal what I call my scarcity wound, which makes me feel like it's never enough. I need to do more. I need to do more, whether that's acquiring more or earning more or getting more award-winning books and getting more clients or whatever. I am trying to heal that wound. And I would say to you this, the fear is the hard part. The overcoming the fear is the hard part. Because when we take a look at fear through a psychological lens, like literally a neuroscience lens, fear is literally our body saying, I'm going to die. So for a lot of us, that fear of, I need to have more, I need to have more, I need to have more, even though someone is a billionaire, I need to have more, which makes no sense from like a logical perspective. But if one's body feels like they're going to die if they don't acquire more, that's what the motivation is. And so the hard part is doing the work around the fear, but the actual practice of showing up and living with an abundance mindset, or recognizing that every single thing that I do impacts every single other person on this planet, is actually not a hard way to live. And in fact, once we choose this mindset and we hunker down in this mindset and we apply this mindset in how we're living, we start to see that life is really beautiful and that people respond really well to this spirit. And because of that, we have beautiful experiences all the time with random people on the street, at the supermarket, at the airport. Like, I travel a lot for work because I'm always speaking, in our homes. And what we start to see is that it feels really good to live with this mindset. And that fear that we have around it's not enough and I don't have enough, we start to heal that wound. And so I think the biggest part, though, the hardest part, is starting to work on the fear and starting to transition into living with this mindset.
I think incredible things are possible when one truly internalizes the abundance mindset and because with that, the pie can get bigger. Obviously, you've got to put in the work, as Chris Hedges likes to say. A dream is something you strive towards. A delusion is something you live in. And so yeah, I mean, I think the pie can most certainly get bigger in terms of opportunity. But I guess I'm wondering, what's the solution? Is it just as simple as passing laws and regulations mandating inclusion and diversity, or does it require something more? Because cultures tend to be tougher to change sometimes.
Well, I think a lot of education here is needed, a lot of awareness building. Let me go micro here. Let me be like really specific. One of the things that I find moves the dial the most within organizations is when leaders learn about the lived experiences in the trenches of the workplace. So what do I mean by this? I often find that C-suite leaders or the management committee or partner board or whatever, they have a disconnect on what is actually happening, how people are feeling at their desks while they're working away. And in fact, I call it information asymmetry. Like the information does not get to the leaders because of fear. Other leaders or team members are afraid to tell the leaders the truth around how hard it is, the challenges and the struggles they're having. And so leaders have an inflated sense of how good things are in the work trenches. And so one of the most powerful things I find that helps to move the needle within organizations as it relates to any leadership experience, whether that be psychological safety, whether that be greater transparency, whether that's improving how we give feedback, whether that's about how decision making is taking place, whether that's the how are we integrating AI, like whatever it is. When we gather data, like actually interview and talk to, hold focus groups, have conversations with team members from across lines of business to hear about how are things going with you, like what are you experiencing, what's going well, what's not going well, et cetera, and gather that feedback. That's when we're able to pick up themes and sound bites around the experiences in the workplace that then we can take back and share with leaders. And I find that when we can give leaders the concrete sound bites and themes and data that we have collected from our own company around this is how people are feeling, it's what causes leaders to sit up and say, what? There are people here who feel like they don't belong, that they don't trust their leaders, that they feel like only some people have access to high quality work while others don't, that they feel like leaders don't care and are apathetic, especially senior leaders. Like they think I don't care. It's when leaders start to get the real data from their own workplace, from their own workers, that the real shifts start to happen. Because up until then, it's like oh, this happens at X company over there and Y company over there. It's not happening here, because here everyone is doing really well and we all love each other. Like there's an inflated sense of how well things are going. So I think data, gathering this type of feedback really can help to shift organizational cultures and strategies and leader mindsets.
So if we were to look at the long-term viability of DEI, if we were having this conversation 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years from now, would we be having a different discussion because it's a different world?
Oh, absolutely. Like I think we are about to have the socks knocked off of us, I think, as it relates to workplaces. And why am I saying this? I feel like the differences between generational mindsets, it's so pronounced that, in my view, it will force massive cultural shifts. I think that we are seeing like AI alone. Uh, as someone who is a leadership expert, an organizational development design expert, in addition to DEI, I'm like, I personally can't wrap my mind around what workplaces are going to look like in 20 years. Like the shift of jobs and replacement of actual human beings by AI. I'm like, I marveled at the thought. So I think that there's all kinds of shifts coming our way that will force us to have to rework how it is that we are managing workplaces, and that includes inclusion concepts.
As we wrap up, do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to leave the audience or our students with, in terms of the brave new world that they're going to face, and how DI is going to be an important part of that?
As someone who deeply struggled, like when I first became a lawyer at the age of 25, I was young. I was in my mid-20s. As a woman of color, navigating these corporate towers where everything was so fancy, and I did not grow up with a fancy background and all that. I felt the pressure to change who I am, to get ahead, and I felt like I should push down my differences, and while it helped me to open some doors for success, I personally became lost, and I lost who I was. And then came the hard work, the decade-long hard work of like coming back to myself. And as I now hit the 50 mark in my own life, I'm like, the greatest gift I gave myself was the gift of belonging, of authenticity and belonging. And it is really hard to change systems of power, privilege. We're doing the best we can, so many of us. But the number one thing you can do for yourself as you navigate your workplace, society, your families, life on a whole, is to belong to yourself. The more I do my work to belong to myself, it matters less and less about what happens around me, because what's happening in me is giving me peace of mind and stillness and power and strength. And that is what keeps me grounded and anchored. And so I would say, do your work to belong to yourself. And if you're like, what is she even talking about? You can just Google my name, Ritu Bhasin, online. And I have lots online. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. I have 2 websites, a YouTube channel. There's so much online to learn more about what I mean on that front. But give yourself that gift of belonging. It will literally change your life.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ajay.
To our listeners, thank you. Until next time.